B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Moed Katan Daf Yud. We're going to start 2 lines from the bottom of Daf Tezayin Omid Beis. Omer of Tanchum Bereider Reb Chia Ish Kfar Akoi, from the village of Akoi. Omer Reb Yaakov Bar Acha Omer Reb Simloi, in the name of Reb Simloi. V'omri lo, others suggest Omer of Tanchum Omer of Huna, it was said in the name of Reb Huna. V'omri lo Omer of Huna l'chudei, and others say it was Reb Huna himself who actually said this, and not people who heard it in his name. Talmud shenidol lichvoide, we already saw this on Daf Tezayin Omid Aleph, that if a Talmud, a student, a Talmud Chacham, somebody whose personal honor was slighted, was hurt, he has the permission to put the person, to excommunicate the person who slighted him. And the Rishonim here discussed that there is a difference between this type of nidui and a type of nidui which is made against a person who is arrogant or goes against Hashem and those who represent Hashem. That's a different story. Somebody who's going against one of the mitzvahs HaTorah, that's a more serious type of nidui. Here we're talking about the nidui which is made, so to speak, because people have been hurt. Nidui of nidui, if this Talmud is nidol lichvoidoi because his own honor has been hurt, nidui, the excommunication is valid. The Tanya we learnt in a Brisa. And we already mentioned this on Daf Tezayin. Menudo l'Rav, menudo l'Talmud. If somebody was excommunicated for being disrespectful to a Rav, then the excommunication includes being excommunicated from the Talmidim as well. Menudo l'Talmud, eine menudo l'Rav. But the other way not, if it's only a Talmud that excommunicated somebody, that person is only excommunicated from people on the level of the Talmud, not the Rav. L'Rav hu de'ene menuda, halo kule alma menuda. But anybody who's not on the level of the Rav, all other people, then to them he's excommunicated. The question is now lemai. Let's try and understand this. What does it mean, menuda l'Rav, menuda l'Talmud? Because we're bringing proof from this brisa to what the opening statement, that Talmud shenidol lichvoidoi nidui of nida. Now how do we know that this brisa is talking about nidol lichvoidoi, that he excommunicated somebody for slighting his own honor? If the excommunication we're talking about here is because the person went against one of Hashem's mitzvahs, then ein chochma ve'ein tvuna ve'ein eitzol neged Hashem. It doesn't matter what your status is, if you're a Rav, if you're a Talmud, it doesn't matter who you are. Relative to Hashem, everybody's in the same place. There's no wisdom and there's no understanding and there's no counsel. There's nothing against Hashem. So if we're differentiating here between a Talmud and a Rav, it must be elolav lichvoide atzmo. It must be that it was the Talmud for his own honor, or because his honor was slighted, he excommunicated somebody. And then we have these halachas that menuda l'Rav, menuda l'Talmud, etc. And from there we learn that Talmud shenidol lichvoide niduyev nida. But somebody who's excommunicated because he went against one of Hashem's mitzvahs, the excommunication is valid across the board and he is excommunicated from everybody. Continues the Gemara Omer of Yosef. Tzurva mirabonon. Even a Talmud Chacham, Ovid inish dina lenafshei, there is a concept we're going to learn more about later on in Shas, in Baba Kama, of Ovid inish dina denafshei, in certain situations when waiting for the Beis Din to get involved could mean that the person's going to lose something, he can actually be Ovid, he can enforce the din of the law lenafshei on his own, b'milsa de psikale, on a matter which is very clear to him. There's a discussion, what's the chiddush here? Why should a Talmud Chacham be different to anybody else? If Ovid inish dina lenafshei is across the board, it seems that Talmud Tzurva mirabonon, there would have been a reason for that he shouldn't be Ovid inish dina lenafshei. Nonetheless, Rav Yosef says he can, and then the Mukhi Yosef discusses this. Continues the Gemara, Hahu Tzurva mirabonon, another halacha regarding a Talmud Chacham. A Tzurva mirabonon is generally referring to a young Talmud Chacham, to have Yisoni Shumone. For some reason, he had a bad reputation. Obviously, word went round that he had done things he shouldn't have done. Omer Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda now said, Heichen Levid, what should we do about him? L'shamte, should we excommunicate him as we would if he wasn't a Talmud Chacham? But Tzricha le'Rabbonon. The other Chachomim in his place where he lives, they need him. He is their teacher. if you're going to excommunicate him, there's going to be an issue with that. And we did discuss earlier on whether somebody who's excommunicated is allowed to teach Torah, but either way, there will definitely be some issue here, since if we're going to excommunicate him, it's definitely going to hinder his desire or ability to teach the people in his place. Lo ilishamte, should we not excommunicate him? Then there's going to be some desecration, some chilul of the Kvod Shamayim, because what we're supposed to do is that somebody who's going against, who's got bad reputation, and there's reason to believe that he's done something wrong, then in certain instances he does have to be excommunicated. Omar Leis, Rabbi Yehuda said, L'Rabba bar bar Chona. That means Rabbi Yehuda had this query, and he didn't know what to do. So he asked Rabbi bar bar Chona, have you heard anything about this? Do you know what we should do? Do you hear anything from your Rebbes, from your teachers, as to what we should do when a tzurva mirabonon does something that would make him deserving of excommunication? So Rabbi bar Chona said, I'll tell you what Rabbi Yechanan said. It says in a pasuk in Malachi, Kisif sei kohen yishmeru das, because the lips of the kohanim, they safeguard the knowledge of the Torah, and you should seek Torah from the mouth of this kohen. The kohanim were part of the teachers in Klal Yisrael. Ki malach Hashem tzvokisu, he's compared to an angel. Well, a malach could mean an angel, it could mean an agent. So what do we learn from this pasuk? That what type of kohen should you learn from? Im doime harav, if the teacher is compared, resembles lemalach Hashem, an angel, then yivakshu Torah mipiv. Only then, and only then, you should be seeking Torah from him. V'im lav, but if he's not on that level, al yivakshu Torah mipiv, you're not supposed to be seeking Torah from him. And therefore, what Rabbi Yechanan was actually saying, and what we were learning from this, is that what was you had two sides of the coin. You're going to say, on the one hand, if we excommunicate him, people may not learn from him. If we don't excommunicate him, then there might be a chilul Hashem. And the answer is, they shouldn't be learning from him. If he's been accused of doing these things, then he's not compared to a malach, to an angel, and nobody should be learning from him. And if no one should be learning from him, then we have no issue to excommunicate him. Shamti Rav Yehuda, and Rav Yehuda excommunicated him. L'soif, what happened at the end? Ichlish Rav Yehuda, Rav Yehuda became ill. Also Rabbanon l'shiyulebe, the Rabbanon came to inquire about Rav Yehuda. V'aso ihu, and this tzurva mirabonon, this person who had been excommunicated by Rav Yehuda, nami bahadayu, also came with them to visit Rav Yehuda. Katchazi Rav Yehuda, when Rav Yehuda saw him, chiech, he was smiling. Omar lei, this person said to Rav Yehuda, loy mistayich deshamte lahu gavra. Is it not enough that you excommunicated that person, referring to himself? Elachuche nami chayech be, you're also smiling and laughing at me. You know, what makes that appropriate? Omar Leis, Rav Yehuda said to him, Lav b'ditchom mechayachna. I'm not smiling about you. Elo d'chiazalnu lahu alma. When I get to the next world, b'dicha datoy, then I'm going to be very happy there. Why? Dafilu legavra kavasoch, because even a person like you, a Talmud Chacham like you, lo chanifulei, I didn't get flattered by you, and I managed to put you in excommunication, and I didn't take into account who you were. Noch nafshed Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda passed away, and also lebei midrasha. And this person who had been excommunicated by Rav Yehuda, he came to the Beis HaMedrash. Omar luhu, and he said in the Beis HaMedrash, Sharuli, release me from the excommunication that Rav Yehuda had done to me. Omru le Rabbanon. So the Chachamim said to him, Gavra dechoshiv k'Rav Yehuda. If a person like Rav Yehuda, leka hocha delishulecha, there's no person as important as Rav Yehuda here in the Beis HaMedrash who can release you from the excommunication. Oz elozil legabe de Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya. Go to Rabbi Yehuda the Nasi, delishulach, and he is more important, or as important, or more important than Rav Yehuda, and he can release you from the excommunication of Rav Yehuda. Ozal lekamei. He went to Rav Yehuda Nasiya. Omar leil Rav Ami. So Rav Yehuda Nasiya said to Rav Ami, Puk ayin bedine. Go out and look into the law, look into whether this person is deserving of being released of his excommunication or not. Ime boya lemishurele. If he's if we're required and he's deserving of being released, surely, then we can release him from the nidui. Ayin Rabbi Bedine. Rabbi looked into it. Sovan Mishrele, and he actually came to the conclusion that we should release him from the excommunication. Omar Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani al Raglov v'Omar. Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, who wasn't usually in the Beis HaMedrash. It happened to be that day he was in the Beis HaMedrash. He got up on his feet, v'Omar, and he said, Ma shivcho shel Beis Rebbe. I remember the maidservant in your grandfather, you Rabbi Yehuda Nasia's grandfather, right? Which was in Beis Rebbe, the Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. I remember the maidservant that even when she excommunicated somebody, lo noagu chachomim kalos roish b'niduya shaloi shonim. The chachomim, they were not light-headed to release for 3 years. They would not release the excommunication of that maidservant. We'll soon see what the story there was. Yehuda Chavereinu, and now of Yehuda, our friend here, our colleague who had passed away. Alachas kama v'kama. Would it not make sense that we shouldn't be so quick to release a nidui that he made? Omer Reb Zera. So Reb Zera said, Mai de kamon de osa ha'itna hai sabo b'bei Medrasha. It's so interesting that just today, this elder, who was Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani, should be here in the Beis HaMedrash. He hasn't been here for a few years. And Shema Mino, it seems from the fact that Hashem had sent him to the Beis HaMedrash today, and he got up to make this comment, it seems that Hashem does not feel that it's the right time that we should release him from his nidui, and they didn't release him from Rav Yehuda's nidui. No fact, this person went out, Ki kabochi va'ozil, whilst he was going and he was crying, also Zibura, a bee came, v'torkea amosei, and bit him on his omer, v'shochiv, and he died. Ailu l'mayrosa, they wanted to take this tzur v'mirabonon, who died in a state of excommunication, but they wanted to take him to the cave, to Chasidi, where the pious people are buried. V'loi kibluhu ilavayu, but there was a snake at the entrance of that cave that did not allow them to come in. V'loi kibluhu they went then to the people of lesser caliber than the Chasidim. The Chasidim are pious people. They do lifnim mishur sadin. They go beyond the letter of the law. They would not let this person in. They went to the Dayanim, those who are very particular with the judgment, with the law. V'kibluhu, and in that cave they let him in to bury him. Ma'itama. Da'ovid kerbiloi. Why was he deserving? Why did they let him in? Why was the cave of the Dayanim open to him? Da'avad Kerbiloi, in a moment we'll see what that is, but since, even though he was accused of doing an Aveira, Tosfos says he was accused of doing Znus, and that's why they wanted to excommunicate him. But since he did the Aveira, or Da'avad, assuming that he did whatever he did it like Rabbi Loi, therefore there was some merit there, and he was allowed to be buried in the cave with the Dayanim. The Tanya we learned in the Braisa, Rabbi Loi Oimer, Imraya Odom Shiyitzrem is Gabrielov. If a person sees that his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, is getting the better of him, Yelich Lemokim Shein Makir Noi, so he should go to a place where people don't recognize him. V'yelbash Choyrim, and he should wear black clothes. V'yisatish Choyrim, and he should wrap himself and wear black with black clothes. V'yasem Ashelibu Chofetz, and do what his heart desires. And the first pshat of Rashi here says that if you've got no choice and you feel overcome by the Yetzer Hara and you're going to do the Aveira, at least do it in a way, don't do it in a way where there'll be Chilul Hashem, where people know who you are. Go to a faraway place where nobody knows you, dress in black clothes, and then at least if you do the Aveira, there will not be a Chilul Hashem. But Rashi brings that they heard from Rav Hai Gaon, that Rav Hai Gaon actually said that if you do these things, he will guarantee that you'll no longer want to do the Aveira. And now the Gemara says that Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani mentioned an incident that he remembered from the grandfather of Rabbi Yehuda Nasia, which was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. There was a maidservant there that put somebody into excommunication, and that for 3 years the Chachomim didn't release that nidui. So the Gemara is now asking, Shivcho shel Beis Rebbe, this maidservant of Rebbe, Maihi, what was the story? The Amoso de Bei Rebbe, the maidservant of Rebbe, Chazio lahu Gavra saw this person to have a mochi Libnoi Godel, that he was hitting an older child, a mature child. Omroshi said, Leheva ha'ugaver b'shamto, this person who's hitting his child should be excommunicated. Because he's transgressed the posuk of lifnei iver, before a blind person, lesitin michel, do not put a stumbling block. If you punish an older and mature child, he might rebel against his father, and it will be his father who will have caused him this by hitting him. And therefore the father's put a stumbling block before the child, and therefore this father deserves to be excommunicated. The Brisa quotes this posuk and says that the posuk is talking about somebody who hits a mature and older child. Continues the Gemara, Resh Lakish have a manter paradisa. Resh Lakish was guarding an orchard. Osahu gavra, this trespasser, this person came, and he was eating figs. He just picked some figs off the field. Rama Beikola. So Shlokish raised his voice to sort of send him away and say, what are you doing here? I'm guarding this orchard. These are not your figs. You're not supposed to be here. Well, this trespasser just ignored Shlokish. Omar. So Shlokish said, Leheva hahu gavr b'shamta. That you, the trespasser, you're ignoring me. You're stealing the figs. You deserve to be excommunicated. Omar Li, this trespasser, said back to Shlokish, Adarab, on the contrary, Leheva hahu gavr b'shamta. The very fact that you excommunicated me in a way that you were not supposed to, you deserve to be excommunicated. In Momoin, if you have a claim and you say that I've stolen figs and I have to pay for them, nischayavti lecha, if I owe you money, nidui min nischayavti lecha, then take me to Beis Din. But am I chayav for a nidui, to be excommunicated? What gave you the permission to excommunicate me? Also lebei medrasha. So they came to the Beis HaMedrash. Shlokish came to the Beis HaMedrash to ask who's right and what do we do here. Omar le sheloi nidui. And they told him in the Beis HaMedrash that you, Shlokish, the truth is that his nidui, the fact that he excommunicated you, is actually valid. Shalachon, the nidui that you made on him, einu nidui, is invalid. So Shlokish says, okay, Moed Katan, what can I do? How can I remedy this? Understand, I made a mistake. I'm now in excommunication. This person excommunicated me. How do I get out of this situation? So they told him, Zil gabe, go to that person and ask him to release you from it. So Shlokish says, Lo yadanuli, I don't know who he is. He was some trespasser. Omrulei, the Chachomim said to Shlokish, Zil gabe nesio, so go to the Nasi and he can release you. He can release you from this person's nidui. To Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, niduhu ve'enu yodea mi nidu. If somebody was excommunicated and he doesn't know who excommunicated him, yelech etzel nasi, he can go to the nasi, ve'yatu le niduya, and the nasi can undo and release him from the nidui. Continues the Gemara, Oma Rav Huna. B'usha iskinu, in Usha they decreed, Av Beis Din shesorach. If you have an Av Beis Din, the leader of a court, a legal court, that did an Aveira, Ein menadin oisei, we do not excommunicate him. Elo oimer loi, we say to him, Hachbeid. This is a posuk, the posuk in Melachim, that says, He koveid v'shev b'veisecha. What does the word he koveid mean? Either it means respect yourself. We don't want to put you in nidui, but respect yourself and go to your house and just stay there. And that way it'll be similar to the consequences of an excommunication, but we won't actually have excommunicated you. And there's another explanation that says, pretend that you have like a headache, which is called kovid roish. So you have a headache and stay at home. So either way, whether the word hikovid means to honor yourself, self-esteem, self-dignity, or that it means pretend to have a headache, but either way, go home and stay there. Chozar v'sorach. If this Av Beis Din again did an Aveira, at that point, we do excommunicate him because of the Chilul Hashem. And they are arguing with Resh Lakish. What Rav Huna said in the name of Usha, Resh Lakish argued, to Omer Resh Lakish, Talmud Chacham shesorach, a Talmud Chacham who does an Aveira, ein menadin oisei b'frahesia, we never openly and publicly excommunicate him. Shenemer, as it says in the Pasuk, v'choshalto hayoim, v'choshal gam novi imcha, lailo v'domisi imecha. V'choshalto hayom means that you stumbled today, v'choshal gam novi, and there was a novi sheker, also stumbled, imcha, lailo, at night, What does it mean? What's the word laila doing here? Says the Gemara that kisehu kalayla, you should conceal this. Since we were talking about a Talmud Chacham, we conceal it, and like it's laila, like at night, things are covered over, darkness covers everything, you can't see what's going on. So to the Talmud Chacham, you should cover over his sins, and you should not publicize them by excommunicating him. Continues the Gemara, Marzutra Chasida. Ki mechayev tzuvim rabbanon shamta. When a young Talmud Chacham was deserving of being excommunicated, Bereisha, at first, what would Marzutra do? Marzutra Chasida, who was very pious, first mashmit nafshei. He would, so to speak, put himself into cherem, which was in honor of that Talmud Chacham, who now needs to be excommunicated. So he would first excommunicate himself, v'hoda mashmis ledidei, and then he would excommunicate this Talmud Chacham. Ki hava ayel boshbizei. When Marzutra Chasida would go back to his lodgings, would be back at home, shari le'elu nafshei, he would first undo his own excommunication against himself, v'hoda shari le'elu didei, and then he would undo the excommunication that was done against this tzurvim rabbanon. Omer of Gidla Marav, was said in the name of Rav, Talmud Chacham menadeh le'atzmoi, a Talmud Chacham can put himself into nidui, umeifur le'atzmoi, and he can undo that himself as well. Omer of Papa says, Teisili, that I will be reward is coming to me, that Deloi Shamiti Tzuvim Rabbanon Me'oilam. Rav Papa says, I am deserving of reward because I never excommunicated any Talmud Chacham. Elokika Machayev Tzuvim Rabbanon Shamta. When we had a young Talmud Chacham that was deserving of being excommunicated, Heicha Ovid, what should we do? We can't just let loose and do nothing. Kihad b'marova, in the same way as in Marova, in Eretz Yisrael, that Mimnu and Negida, they would vote as to whether a person is deserving of lashes, the Tzuvim Rabbanon, v'lo Mimnu Ashamta, they would not vote as to whether he should be excommunicated. So too says Rav Papa, that when I saw that Talmud Chacham is actually deserving of being excommunicated, instead of that I would do the lesser punishment, and I would rather give him the lashes rather than excommunicate him. Continues the Gemara. My shamta. We keep using the word shamta. What does the word shamta mean? It means to excommunicate, but how does that word mean excommunication? Omar Rav said the word shamta means shame misa, a designation of death. Because when a person is excommunicated, then he's got some association to death. Shmuel Omar, shmamo here. That the word shamta comes from the word shmama, which is desolation, should be on this person. And this excommunication actually has everlasting effects. It affects him like fats that are smeared on the walls of an oven. They get absorbed in the walls and never come out of the walls. So too, the excommunication has an effect on the person forever. Upliga de Rish Lakish, and this is arguing with what Rish Lakish says. The Omer Rish Lakish kashem shenichnasta. The Rish Lakish says the same way that shenichneses b'mosayim v'arboim u'shmoinei ivarim, in the same way as an excommunication affects the 248 limbs of a person, when you actually enact and you make the excommunication, kach kasheyetzes, when the excommunication departs, when you release him from the excommunication, it leaves all the 248 limbs, and he'll no longer be affected by it. Where do we find that when a person receives, when the shamta, the nida actually goes into a person, t'chsiv, as it says in the pasuk, so we see that the term used in the pasuk for an excommunication is cherem, and cherem is begematria mosayim arboim u'shmoino hava. The numerical value of the word cherem is ramach, is 248, which correspond to the 248 limbs of a person. And when the excommunication goes out of the person, where do we see that the excommunication effects leave a person completely? It says in the pasuk, Beroiges Rachim Tizkir, in wrath, remember that you should remember Rachmonus, which means you should remember mercy. And Rachim, this word Rachim, which is mercy, is B'gematria Hochehava, has the same numerical value as 248, which means that even though there has been wrath and he's been excommunicated, once we've been mercy against him or towards him, and we release him from the excommunication, that release affects all the Rachim, all the 248 limbs of the person. Continues the Gemara, Omer of Yosef, Shtei Shamta Agnuvta de Kalba. Cast an excommunication on the tail of a dog, V'ihi Dida Ovda. And then once you've cast the excommunication against the tail of a dog, it will do its job and the tail of the dog will get harmed. What's he referring to? Dahu Kalba. There was this dog, to have a ochil mesone de rabbonon, that would bite away and eat away at the shoes of the Talmidei Chachomim. Manu, and they didn't know who the culprit was. V'shamtule. So they just made an anonymous type of excommunication, and they just said that whoever's chewing away at the shoes of the Talmidei Chachomim should be excommunicated. Itle beinura bignuvte. And then fire caught onto the tail of this dog, and consumed the tail. Continues the Gemara. Hahu alma. There was this bully, that was tormenting a young Talmid Chacham. So he came to Rav Yosef. Omar le, Rav Yosef told him, Zil go shamte, and excommunicate him. Omar le. So this Talmid Chacham said to Rav Yosef, Mr. Finna, I'm afraid of this bully. Mr. Finna mine. Omar le. So Rav Yosef said, Shkili pticha. So instead of just saying it to him, do something even more forceful and actually put the excommunication in writing. That's called a psicha. It's a written shamta. Write it down. So then this Tovim Rabbanon said back to Rav Yosef, Kol shekain de Mr. Finna, if I'm going to put the shamta in writing, he's going to be even more angry with me, and I have even more reason to be afraid of this bully. Omar le, so Rav Yosef says, I'll tell you what to. Shokle, take this piece of paper that you're writing down the shamta. Ochsei bekada. Place it in a jar. V'ochsei beikivra. And go and put it into a Beis HaKvaros, to a graveyard, and there's no people there. Nobody will reveal it. V'kori bei, and blow into this jug alpha shipurei, 1,000 sounds of a shofar, ba'arboin yoimin, over 40 days. Ozil ovid hachi. He did this, and at the end, poka kada, the jug burst, umis almo, and this bully died. Says the Gemara, Mai shipuri. Why would we be using the sounds of the shofar when it comes to the shamta, the excommunication? Says the Gemara, because the word shifurei, the shofar, is similar to shenifroim, that we exact retribution mimenu from this person. The piroin and shofar has the similar letters. Mai tavra. So why, besides for doing a tkiyah, why do you also do a shvarim, which is a broken sound? Omer Yitzchok Breder of Yehuda, because tavra bote romi, because the power of an excommunication can break even very tall buildings. Tanya, Omer Shimon ben Gamliel, Kol mokim shenosnu chachomim eineim, anywhere where the chachomim set their eyes, oy misa oy oyni, it will cause either death or poverty. So you see that there's a tremendous power to the shamta, to the excommunication, that can even go against, so to speak, and break tall buildings and very strong buildings, so to speak, that the koyach of a shamta is extremely strong. And that's why we use the shvarim, which is a broken sound, to allude to that this shamta can break anything. Continues the Gemara. And this takes us now back to the Mishnah at the beginning of the Perek. We saw in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Beis, Ve'elu megalchin b'moed, and there's a list of those that are allowed to have haircuts on Chol HaMoed. And then the Mishnah says, Ve'elu mechabsim, these are the people who are allowed to wash their clothes on Chol HaMoed. So we saw in the Mishnah, V'hanozir v'hametzaira mitumosei l'tarosei, when a nozir or a metzaira now become tohir. They were tomei before, now they become tohir, and they have to bring their korbanos, but they cannot bring their korbanos before they have a haircut. They are allowed to have a haircut if they reach this point in their becoming tahir on Chol HaMoed, they can have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Boy minei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera the following question: is this only true when they had no opportunity before Chol HaMoed, before Yom Tov, to have a haircut? Or could it be, even if they did have time before Yom Tov, nonetheless we allow them to have a haircut on Yom Tov because they have to bring korbanos, and they cannot bring the korbanos before they have the haircut. So if you're going to punish them for not having the haircut before Yom Tov, they're going to have to delay. They won't have the haircut on Yom Tov. They won't be able to bring their korbanos till after the end of Yom Tov, and that's not something we want. So maybe we'd rather they bring their korbanos on time, and we forego the fact that they should have had a haircut before Yom Tov, and we allow them even to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. That was the question of the Gemara. Omar Lei, so Rabbi Zera said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, Tanina, we learned in a Brisa, Kol elu she'omru mutorim legaleach, all those that we learned are allowed to have a haircut b'moed on Chol HaMoed, b'shelo yolem pnai. It's only if they didn't have time to have a haircut before Yom Tov, aval hoyolem pnai. If they did have time before Yom Tov, then asurim, they're not allowed to have a haircut on Yom Tov. However, Nazir or Metzora, regarding the Nazir or the Metzora, Afal Pishayolem Pnai Mutarim. Even if they had the opportunity of having a haircut before Yom Tov and they didn't, which is not good, nonetheless they're allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. And here the Gemara says the reason we explained before, Shlo Yishu Korbanosem, in order that they shouldn't delay bringing the korbanos until they're allowed to have their haircut. After Yom Tov, we say, rather have your haircut on Chol HaMoed and bring your korbanos as soon as possible. Continues the Gemara. Ton hakohen v'ha'ovel mutorin begiluach. A kohen and an ovel, a person who was in mourning, is allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. So now the question is, hi ovel, this person in mourning, hey chedomi, in what case is it talking about that he's allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed? Is it that he finished the Shiva 2 days before Yom Tov? The day before Yom Tov, he's now finished Shiva. The Shloshim has started. Now, once the Shloshim start, the rule is as follows, that Yom Tov interrupts Shiva in the event that Shiva has started, and Yom Tov interrupts the Shloshim if the Shloshim have started. So if a person is in the middle of Shiva and then it's Yom Tov, the Shiva is over, the Shloshim but the Shloshim, they do not get broken, and after Yom Tov he'll carry on with halachas of Shloshim. If, however, it's the middle of Shloshim and there's Yom Tov, then from Yom Tov there's no more Shloshim, the halachas of Shloshim don't apply. So this person, who the 8th day, which is the first day where the halachas of Shloshim apply, then the 8th day was on Erev Yom Tov, and therefore the Yom Tov, which is on the next day, was going to sever entirely the Shloshim, because that's what Yom Tov does. Then he would be allowed to have a haircut on Erev Yom Tov. So if so, he should have had his haircut on Erev Yom Tov, and he didn't. And somebody who could have and had the opportunity on Erev Yom Tov and didn't use it, he's not allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. So how can you say that an oval can have his haircut on Chol HaMoed? Elo, it must be shechol shmini sheloi liyos b'Shabbos Erev HaRegel. It must be that the Shiva finished on Friday, and Yom Tov is on Sunday. So the Shiva finished on Friday. He couldn't have a haircut yet. It was the middle of Shiva. When do the Shloshim start? On the 8th day. It's now Shabbos. I can't have a haircut on Shabbos. You're not allowed to have a haircut on Shabbos. Some days already Yom Tov. So then comes Chol HaMoed. In Chol HaMoed, this person didn't have an opportunity before Yom Tov to have a haircut. So he can have his haircut. But he said, if so, Erev Shabbos. He should have had his haircut on Friday. Even though we just said now that Friday was still the last day of Shiva, and Shloshim only start on the next day, which was Shabbos, but Friday was still Shiva. You can't have a haircut in the middle of the Shiva because if Yom Tov comes and the Yom Tov will only interrupt Shiva in the middle of Shiva, but if the Shloshim don't yet start, then you cannot interrupt the Shiva. So says the Gemara, nonetheless, even though Friday was the last day of the Shiva, nonetheless, you should have had your haircut on Erev Shabbos. How can that be? You're in the middle of Shiva still. Because the halacha is like Abba Shaul, and Abba Shaul says that Miktas Hayoim Kekuloi, we're about to see it inside, that part of the day is considered a full day, and therefore just part of the seventh day is already considered Shiva, and therefore the Shloshim don't start on day 8, they actually start a few minutes, or whatever it is, a little bit into day 7, which means Friday, the Shloshim already started. And since the Shloshim already started on Friday, Yom Tov is going to interrupt the Shloshim altogether, therefore you can have a haircut on Friday, L'chvoid Yom Tov. And the Chachomim, even though the Chachomim argue with Abba Shaul on some level, which means even though they say that the Chachomim don't say that Miktas Hayom Kekuloi on the 7th day, and the Chachomim say no, the Shloshim only start on the 8th day, but the Chachomim do agree with Abba Shaul, B'shachol Shmini Sheloi Liyos B'Shabbos, Erev Horegel, the Yom Tov is on Sunday as we're speaking about, and Shabbos is the first day of the Shloshim, which is the 8th day. Not like Abba Shaul says that the Shloshim starts on day 7, but here when day 8, which is, the Chachomim agree the Shloshim start, is Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, Shemuta Legaleach Be'erev Shabbos. Then even though Friday is still considered as part of the Shiva, especially according to the Chachomim who argue with Abba Shaul, but they agree that since you cannot have your haircut on Shabbos, the next day, the first day of the Shloshim, and the next day after that, Sunday is already Yom Tov that's going to interrupt the Shloshim, then you're allowed to have a haircut on Erev Shabbos. And if so, the question comes back. In this case, he should have had his haircut on Friday. And if he should have had his haircut on Friday, then we're not going to allow him to have it on Chol HaMoed. So we're back to our question, when is an Ovel allowed to have his haircut on Chol HaMoed? Says the Gemara, Lo tzricha shechol shvi'i sheloi liyos b'Shabbos erev haregel. Yom Tov is Sunday, and the last day of the Shiva is on Shabbos. And Tana Bora, the Tana of this brisa that says that an Ovel is allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed, Sovar lo k'Abba Shaul, he holds like Abba Shaul, D'omar miktas hayoim kekuloi. He says that part of the 7th day, which we said the 7th day of this person, the last day of Shiva, was on Shabbos, and Yom Tov is on Motzei Shabbos, on Sunday. So since, according to Abba Shaul, when do the Shloshim start? Shabbos morning sometime. And Yom Tov only starts Motzei Shabbos, which means the Shloshim started before Yom Tov, which means that Yom Tov is going to break the Shloshim. But he couldn't have a haircut. He couldn't have a haircut before Shabbos, which was on the 6th day of Shiva. You can't have a haircut then. And therefore, according to Abba Shaul, we understand that on Chol HaMoed, which is broken up, that means the Shloshim is broken, it's already it's discontinued, then on Chol HaMoed, he can have his haircut. Because Abba Shaul says, Miktas Hayom Kekuloi, V'yom Shvi, and the 7th day, which here is Shabbos, Erev Yom Tov, Oile Loi Lekan or Lekan, a little bit of the day is considered Shiva, the rest of the day is considered the Shloshim, V'kiven the Shabbos Hava, but since it's Shabbos, Onosu, he's oinus, he cannot have a haircut, and therefore he can have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Tana Didon, however, the Tana of our Mishnah that doesn't say that an Ovel is allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed, Sovalok Rabbonon, holds like the Chachomim who argue with Abba Shaul. The Omri, they say, Lo Yomrin on Miktas Hayom Kekuloi, we do not say that part of the day is considered the whole day, and therefore the whole of Shabbos is considered Shiva, and Motzei Shabbos straight away is Yom Tov, and the Shloshim hadn't started before Yom Tov. If the Shloshim don't start before Yom Tov, then the Shloshim continue after Yom Tov. And if you're in the middle of Shloshim, you cannot have a haircut. You can't have a haircut on Shloshim, so you obviously can't have a haircut here in Chol HaMoed. V'kate lo yisholim avelos to Shiva, that the Yom Tov started. That means that the Shloshim didn't start before Yom Tov, and therefore the Shiva was the whole Shabbos day is still considered the Shiva, and therefore he cannot have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara. We saw in the Brisa before that not only an Ovel, but also a Kohen is allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Hai Kohen hei Chadami. What sort of situation would we say that a Kohen is allowed to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed? Ileimad Sholim Mishmartoi, Erev Haregel. Are we talking about that? Because how did it work? The Kohanim were split into groups of in shifts called mishmoris. We've learnt about it a few times. So every mishmor started on Shabbos and finished on Shabbos. In his mishmor, we've learnt that you're not allowed to have a Kohen in his mishmor is not allowed to have a haircut, because we don't want him to come into the Beis Hamikdash at the beginning of his mishmor in a way which is not respectable, and in order he shouldn't push off having a haircut, we say you're not allowed to have a haircut that week, and that will force him to have a haircut before he starts his weekly shift, or his week shift, and he'll have a haircut before he comes in. Now we're discussing a case where it's Chol HaMoed, and the Kohen couldn't have a haircut because he was working. He can have it on Chol HaMoed. The question is, in what sort of case are we talking about? Are we talking about that Yom Tov is on Sunday? Ilema de Sholim Mishmartei Erev Haregel, which means Yom Tov is Sunday. He finished his Mishmar on Shabbos. Every Mishmar always finishes on Shabbos. Then we have an issue. Did we not learn that even though a Kohen is not allowed to have a haircut during the week that he's working in the Beis Hamikdash, he is allowed to have a haircut on Thursday and Friday, l'chvoid Shabbos. So over here, if Yom Tov is on Sunday, and it's true that you're going to say, I was working till Shabbos, I was a Kohen, my Mishmar was till Shabbos, and then Motzei Shabbos was Yom Tov, I couldn't have a haircut. Let me have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. The answer is no. The answer is, we tell him, you should have had your haircut on Thursday. A Kohen, even in the week that he's working, can have a haircut on Thursday. Says the Gemara, Loi tzricha de sholim mishmartoi beregel. For example, Yom Tov started on Thursday. His Mishmar started the previous Shabbos. From Shabbos till Wednesday, he couldn't have a haircut because it's his week of Mishmar. Thursday, he couldn't have a haircut because it's Yom Tov. So the time it gets to Chol HaMoed, then this Kohen can say, I'm sorry, but I couldn't have a haircut before Yom Tov. I want to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. So Tana Didon Sovar, the Tana of our Mishnah, that didn't say that a Kohen can have a haircut on Chol HaMoed, holds Sovar, Kiven Ditnan, B'shloisha Prokim Bashona, Hoyu Kol HaMishmoris Shovis, Be'imuri Aragolim, U'Bechiluk Lechem Aponim, we're talking about Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed is always the middle of Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, there's a halacha that even though every Kohen belongs to a certain shift, which we've discussed in the Masechet Tainis, so he had his week. And we're saying this Kohen finished his week after Yom Tov had started. Yom Tov started on Thursday. So now we're saying no. Because over Yom Tov, all the Mishmoris, all the 24 Mishmoris, all the Kohanim, it's as if they're a single Mishmeres. They're allowed to eat from the Matnis Kuhuna, which is what the Gemara here calls the Imuri Haragolim, and the Lechem Aponim that gets distributed, all the Kohen receive it together. So this Kohen, if you started last week, that means the Shabbos before Yom Tov, it's not true to say that your Mishmar has finished now on Shabbos, which was Chol HaMoed, and now which is in the middle of Yom Tov. No, your Mishmar hasn't finished till the end of Yom Tov, and therefore he's still in the middle of his Mishmar. He cannot have a haircut. It's commandalei sholim mishmarte beregel domi. It's as if he didn't finish his mishmeres in the middle of Yom Tov. The Tana Bora, but the Tana of this brisa that says that a Kohen can have a haircut, Sovar, this Tana holds afagav de shaykh bahanoch mishmoris, even though he's associated to all the mishmoris together, and he's allowed to take from the lechem aponim and from the imurim, from the matnis kuhuna. However, mishmarte mio shleimolei. However, this halacha that a Kohen in his mishmeres cannot have a haircut, that is over, because his week finished on Shabbos, which is the middle of Chol HaMoed in the middle of Yom Tov. So his week is over, even though he's still allowed to stay there and still has some part in what's going on in the Beis Hamikdash, similar to if it would be his mishmeres. It's not really his shift, and therefore he's allowed to have a haircut at that point, and that's why the Brisa says a Kohen in this situation where he couldn't have had a haircut before, he can have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. Kol elu she'omru mutorin legaleach. All those that we said are allowed to have a haircut b'moed on Chol HaMoed, mutorin legaleach b'mei evlon. They would also be allowed to have a haircut in the middle of Avelus. And as we saw, people who came from far away and people who are in jail, in captivity, and they came out, then if they came out on Chol HaMoed, the Mishnah says they can have a haircut. So too, if they came out in the middle of their mourning period, they're allowed to have their haircuts. Ask the Gemara, Votanya Asurim. Did we not learn in a Brisa that it's also for them to have a haircut, even in this situation. Omer of Chizda, Omer of Shila, Kitanya Hocha Mutorin, in that brisa that we just saw now, that Kol Elu She'omru Mutorim Legaleach B'Moed, Mutorin Legaleach B'Mei Evlon, is not talking about regular Avelos. It's talking about B'Shetochfuhu Avelov, when there were a number of Avelos, that means that in succession, which means that unfortunately he lost a relative, he was sitting Shiva, and then immediately at the end of the Shiva, he lost another relative. So he's now got 2 weeks of Shiva, and he's got lengthy amounts of Avelos following one after the other. Over there we were more lenient, and if this person was released from jail, or any of the other things we mentioned in the Mishnah, that would allow him to have a haircut on Chol HaMoed, then if he's now in the second lapse of Avelos that followed straight from the first one, and he gets released, then he's allowed to have a haircut. Says the Gemara, if we're talking about that there's twice Avelos, just one after the other, then it's not only these circumstances discussed in the Mishnah where somebody suddenly is left out of jail or suddenly comes from far away and from overseas and can have a haircut. Just even anybody who could have had a haircut before whenever, and then he was sitting Shiva, and then another relative died and he's sitting Shiva again, he can also have a haircut in the middle of the second Avelus. What makes it unique, these cases that are mentioned here, the cases that would override Chol HaMoed? The Tanya, did we not learn in a brisa? Tochfu Avelov zeh b'zeh, if the periods of mourning are in succession one of the other, then in Hichbid Sari, if his hair became very burdensome, then Mekel Batar, he can lighten it with a razor. And he can clean his tunic with water. So and this is talking about anyone that's Tochfuhu Avelov. So what makes it different? This group of people that Kol Elu She'omru Mutorim Legaleach B'Moed, these people that have special permission to override the restrictions of Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara, no, there is a difference. Ha'itma lo, Omar of Chizda, betar v'loi b'misparaim, b'mayim v'loi b'neser v'loi b'ohor. In that brisa, talking about everybody and anybody who has twice Avelus one after the other, there he's allowed to do these things, but in an unusual way. He can cut his hair with a razor, not with scissors. He can wash his clothes with water, but not with neser and ohol, not with any detergents and anything else, just with regular water. However, the brisa that says regarding that these people who are in that special situation that they were just let out of captivity or they've just come from overseas, and like we mentioned in the Mishnah in Hilchos Chol HaMoed, the Mishnah we saw before, in those circumstances, then if they are then in a second set of Avelus, in this circumstance, then for them, they can override the halachas of Avelus altogether, and they can wash their clothes even with Neser and Ohol, and they can even have a haircut with Misparaim in a normal fashion. Omer of Chizda, it's clear from what we just said now, that only if it's Tochfuhu Avelov, then he's allowed to wash his clothes with water, unless he's in that extreme group of people who couldn't do it from beforehand, then they can even wash their clothes normally. But what do we see from here? Zoy Mera says Rav Chizda that an oval osur b'tachpoises, that an oval is not a regular oval, in a regular case is not allowed to wash clothes during his period of mourning. And in Mirz Hashem, in the next shiur, we're going to continue from here.